Hey everybody, it's Lon.TV. I've got another update on the effort to apply digital rights management encryption to over-the-air television. A big filing was made right before the deadline by Public Knowledge, the Electronic Frontier Foundation, Consumer Reports, and a number of other organizations strongly opposing DRM and giving some very good reasons why it should not be allowed. And we are going to explore that filing in this video, so let's get to it. Now, before we dive into this, we do have a sponsor to talk about, and if you're old enough to care about over-the-air television, you're probably old enough to start worrying about your dental health, and we've got a new sponsor, Oclean, with a product that might help you keep your teeth a little bit longer. Let's have a look. So I'm here in the Lon.TV bathroom to talk about this week's sponsor, Oclean, and their A10 Air Pump Water Flosser. This, as its name suggests, is a flossing tool for your teeth that pumps little shots of water in between your teeth so you can floss your teeth quicker and perhaps more effectively than you might be able to do on your own. I often hear from my hygienist and dentist that if I flossed a little better, I might have a little less time in the chair every 6 months, and for me it's often hard to get the floss all the way back to where it needs to be. This tool can really help you with that, and it's super portable. The Air Pump Water Flosser is pretty simple to use. You just fill up its little reservoir, attach a nozzle, get things positioned, and push the power button. It will then pump little jets of water into your teeth to get them as super clean as possible. If you feel a little too much pressure, you've got 3 different operating modes. A soft mode and a massage mode are available to turn down the water pressure a little bit if it's a bit too much initially. And then when it's done, you can pour the water out and store the nozzle in the reservoir for easy travel. The battery will last you the better part of a month, if not a little bit longer. You'll get 2 nozzles in the box. One is a standard nozzle and the other is for folks with braces and other orthodontics. And for a limited time, you can save $20 off your purchase by using the code OCSAVE20 when you go to our link at Lon.TV/Oclean to purchase your A10 flosser. And I want to thank Oclean for their support of the channel and for keeping me out of the dentist chair. Check out the Oclean today at the link you see on screen. So why don't we dive into this filing and see what is in it. You can read it for yourself at Lon.TV/EFF ATSC3. If you are a technology policy nerd like me, I think you'll find this to be very compelling reading. I am only going to scratch the surface of what's in this document because it covers a lot of other issues related to this transition and how it might impact consumers. And I think you'll find it very interesting if you're into this topic as much as I am. They spent a lot of time in this document talking about DRM. So what I'm presenting here is just the main points, but there is a lot more under the surface in the document that I do suggest checking out if you have an interest in this. Now, as I mentioned, this is a joint filing, so Public Knowledge was the lead on this. Their attorney was the one who filed it, but they have contributions from Access Humboldt, Media Council Hawaii, the Open Technology Institute, New America, Consumer Reports, and the Electronic Frontier Foundation. So this is a statement from all of these organizations to the FCC about the transition and the impact on consumers. But let's dive into the DRM component. They lead off their DRM segment by saying that DRM is incompatible with the use of public spectrum. And they talk about how mandatory adoption of ATSC3 encrypted transmissions fundamentally conflicts with longstanding legal, constitutional, and policy frameworks governing broadcast TV. One of the things they bring up here is the lawsuit American Library Association versus the FCC. Now, the lawsuit they're referencing here happened about 20 years ago, and what happened back then was that the broadcasters successfully petitioned the FCC to require equipment manufacturers to support what was called the broadcast flag. And when the broadcast flag was activated on a particular piece of content, DVRs and other devices could not record the content if the flag was checked. Now, your older equipment still would have worked, but anything after the regulation was put in place had to abide by the flag. And a lot of consumers were unhappy about that. The American Library Association was unhappy about that, and I believe the EFF litigated this case on their behalf. And what do you know? They won and forced the FCC to reverse the regulation. And what the court found in that suit was that the FCC lacked authority to regulate what happens inside your TV or computer once it has received a broadcast signal. The broadcast flag rule would have required all signal demodulators to recognize and give effect to a broadcast flag, forcing them not to record or even output in some cases an unencrypted high-def signal if the flag were set. Now, note the word unencrypted. This will become important as we work our way through the filing here. But this was a significant ruling. In fact, I would say this was as significant as the Universal Sony case from the 80s, which made it legal to record things on your home VCR. That's how big a deal this case was, and it was good to see the EFF bring it back when this happened, because it would have significantly, I think, downgraded the television experience for many Americans. Now, they go on to say that the public spectrum is not a private fiefdom. They talk about being a shared, collectively owned resource that the Federal Communications Commission is managing under a mandate to ensure that licensees act as public trustees. This is a very different model than the wireless phone industry, where they're buying a chunk of spectrum from the government and the American people and using it to make money. Here, the broadcasters are allowed to make money in exchange for providing that public service. And as we noted in my own filing, they're supposed to be doing this in the public interest, convenience, and necessity. And they go on to talk about how restrictive the consumer marketplace is about to become if this private DRM regulation is allowed to continue. We have seen on this channel just how bad these certified devices are and how restrictive they are, and in some cases how large of a security hole they are, because some of them are running with versions of Android that are 4 years out of date. I don't need to repeat this. You've all seen the videos, but this is what we're up against right now. And all of the things that we've come to enjoy over the years, including building our own DVRs in a computer, open source products, all of that is going away if this is allowed to continue. The filers here say, in short, DRM permits licensees of public spectrum to act as gatekeepers not only over the content they broadcast, but over the devices and technologies the public may lawfully use to access that content. They also say that DRM is not only inconsistent with the nature of public spectrum, it also directly threatens the exercise of fair use rights. Now, we talk a lot about fair use when it comes to YouTube, but one thing that's very certain in the law is that you as an individual have a fair use to record over-the-air television on your personal equipment. That is what that Sony versus Universal Studios case was all about from 1984. It opened the door to recording television and as a private citizen. And for many years, that has essentially been the law of the land. Individuals have the right to time shift broadcast content for later viewing in the privacy of their homes. But this is where the encryption problem comes into play, because although it is legal to record broadcasts in your home per that Sony case, and it's illegal for the FCC to tell your equipment not to record something, what's also illegal is the fact that you can't circumvent encryption because of the Digital Millennium Copyright Act. We've got a bit of a legal conflict here. As the filers note, they say this legal regime creates a perverse situation in which a consumer may have a clear legal right to use broadcast content in a certain way, but is prevented from exercising that right because the technological barrier cannot be circumvented without violating federal law. And they rightfully say here that this creates a chilling effect on innovation and expression. The filers also talk about these nonsense encoding rules that the ATSC 3 Security Authority announced about a year or two ago. And what they said in those rules was that you could record things. We're not going to restrict any of that. But as the filers correctly note here, these rules are no substitute for legal rights. They're not enforceable by law. They can be changed any time because this private entity is the one making them. And entrusting public rights to private rulemaking is antithetical to both the rule of law and the principles of democratic governance. Can't disagree with that. I think they're right on. One thing they didn't mention in their filing, though, is something that we caught on this channel, because these broadcast encoding rules that the broadcasters told the FCC they created only apply to ATSC 1.0 broadcasts that are simulcast in ATSC 3. So in the future, this doesn't apply to anything. In fact, in the filing, the NAB wants to stop ATSC 1.0 broadcasts as soon as possible and start up ATSC 3 exclusive broadcasts. And none of the ATSC 3 exclusive broadcasts are subject to these rules because they're not simulcast with the older technology. But the filers don't stop there. They talk about how the structure of the A3SA operates without any meaningful oversight. Their licensing terms are confidential. In fact, if you try to make a device, they require you to sign an NDA, so you can't even talk about how any of this stuff works. The decision-making process is opaque. There's no accountability to consumers, to innovators, or public interest stakeholders, and they said it effectively acts as a privatized gatekeeper to the public airwaves. They said this is wholly inconsistent with the FCC's obligation to ensure that access to spectrum is governed by fair, open, and non-discriminatory rules, because right now there is no gateway device that's allowed to tune any of this encrypted content, and they are certainly being discriminated against in the marketplace by these rules that are gatekeeping access to public broadcasts. They also even make the argument here that these transmissions do not meet the definition of broadcasting when they are encrypted and gated by a private security regime. Now, there's a lot more to this filing, so I definitely suggest you check it out. But where they conclude here is that the Commission should reject any transition proposal that incorporates DRM as a condition of content access. They say that a broadcast standard that enforces encryption and private licensing on public content is not a public service, it is a walled garden, and I do agree with that. So where are things at with this entire process? Well, the public comment period ended on May 7th. We're going to see a bunch of new stuff posted by the end of the week because the reply period is going to end on June 6th. So what happens during the reply period is that anyone can reply to any of the prior comments that were made on May 7th or earlier. And one thing I noticed is that everybody waited until that last day to file, and I expect that we'll see a lot of replies dropped right at the deadline so that the people they're replying to don't have an opportunity to reply back. It's all about the gamesmanship here. So be on the lookout for June 6th. Up until that point, you can send in replies to any of the comments that you've seen filed by others. So, for example, if you wanted to reply to the Sinclair filing, which I plan to do in another day or two, you can do that, even if you haven't filed initially. You can head over to my website at Lon.TV/FCC instructions to learn how you can submit your reply comment. Just be sure to call it a reply when you're filling out the form, and you can add your comment to the mix as long as you're replying to an existing comment. So what happens after June 6th, after all of this reply period ends? Well, what begins is that decision-making process where the FCC will begin drafting its order for the ATSC 3 transition. The challenge, though, is that we're a little short on FCC commissioners. So there are two that are stepping down, Jeffrey Starks and Nathan Symington, which leaves us with only 2 members on the FCC. Now, normally the FCC has 5 members. 3 of them are of the president's political party, and 2 of them are the minority party. Now, when President Trump took over, President Biden's FCC chairwoman stepped down from the commission, and that's how we got to 4. So the FCC has been 2 Democrats and 2 Republicans up until this point. Jeffrey Starks, a Democrat, and Nathan Symington, a Republican, are both stepping down, so that brings us down to 2. And what happened a few weeks ago was that a Senate committee approved a Republican, Olivia Trusty, to join the commission. She had bipartisan support for the most part. She did have a few no votes, but she seems to be well-liked across the aisle nonetheless. However, Democrats are concerned that they don't have a nominee coming in to replace the other one that stepped down, and they don't want things to move until there's a Republican and a Democrat appointed. However, I don't think the Trump administration is going to want an evenly split FCC, so we may need to wait until they get another Republican nominee so they can get the 2 Republicans and the Democrat on the commission, so you've got a 3-2 split here. For a while after the Biden administration took over, there was a lot of political machinations that kept the FCC equally split, and that prevented a lot of decisions from getting made. So I think we might see this dragging out for a while until the FCC gets fully seated. They may be ready to move after June 6th, but they may not have the members to actually enact a vote that could pass. So it's going to be a while, and I don't expect to see a decision made anytime soon. But if you can get your comments in or your reply to comments, it's definitely a good idea to do it, because at some point they're all going to look at this stuff, and a good bulk of the FCC, 3 members potentially, are coming in fresh to this issue. So it's a good time to get those reply comments in if you do have more to say. A little later in the week, maybe early next week, we're going to have an interview with the man who authored what we just read through on the video here, John Bergmeyer from Public Knowledge. He's going to come on the show. I'm going to interview him on Friday, and depending on my schedule, I'm going to get this up either Saturday or early next week on Monday. So if you have questions that you'd like John to answer, please leave them in the comment stream, and I'll try to work them into the interview. I'm really looking forward to talking to him. He was very excited to see that so many people are interested in this topic, so I think it's going to be a fun talk. So get those questions in, and I'll try to get as many of them worked into the show as I can. So that's going to do it for this DRM update. We'll have more to come here, and then it's going to get quiet for a while because the FCC won't be able to do anything, and the whole process will just be kind of waiting until they get these members on. So have patience, but I'll keep coming up with stuff as news develops. That will do it for this one. Until next time, this is Lon Seidman. Thanks for watching.